Racing sailboats demands strong hearts, quick minds, and powerful hands. Even in light or moderate weather, heart, mind, and hands are put to the test against the competition and against two of nature's most mercurial forces, wind and water. And when the going is rough and the action hairy, the test becomes a trial by torment. Few places in the world challenge small yachts with rougher going and hairier action than unpredictable San Francisco Bay, and most particularly a notorious stretch of water off the city's northern front, where torrential tides, whistling winds, and violent wave action demand the most of heart, mind, and hands. On this stretch of water, conditions can force even huge ocean racing yachts into mind-boggling tactics in which, to avoid or use the tides, they are sailed like dinghies along the rocky shoreline. This is a story of sailboat racing on the San Francisco city front and of a unique regatta which puts sailors and their boats to a test of rough going and close action. The scene is San Francisco Bay, just off the famed St. Francis Yacht Club. The time early May, when winds blow up to 35 miles an hour on many afternoons, and when tides rush in and out of the bay at speeds often reaching 4 miles per hour. The competitors are some 290 sailors and 80 boats, representing 5 one-design classes noted for their ability to cope with the demands of city-front racing. All are wooden-hulled yachts. The International One Design, or IC, is raced all over the world. The Knarr is another international class. And so is the feisty Nordic Folkboat. The legendary Bird Boat is a San Francisco Bay class. And the colorful Little Bear is another Bay native. The 5 fleets are invited annually by St. Francis Yacht Club to compete in a 3-day, 4-race series. The series opener took place on a Friday evening, with the ICs the first fleet to start. Later, the Birds got their starting gun. The Knarrs were next, followed by the Folkboats and the Bears. Were moderately brisk, 12 to 15 miles an hour, and from the west. A 2-mile-per-hour ebb or outgoing tide gave the boats a push toward the first mark, a buoy at the western end of the course. The ICs and Birds rounded the mark neatly, but when the other fleets reached the buoy area, the elements began to play tricks. small area around the mark, the wind veered to the south, and instead of an ebb tide, the boats found a nasty reverse current. Some folk boats, arriving tightly bunched, got all messed up. The bears had their problems too. Once away from the buoy, the boats found the west wind again and took off speedily for the next turning mark, 3 miles to the east. Despite the hassle at the windward buoy, the race was sailed in good time, as the boats returned from the downwind mark, getting lots of help from the ebb tide. All in all, the elements had been kind. The city front had not been its usual cranky self.
Hey, move your dogs a little bit farther away from the doctor. Okay. It's in his name. That's all I know. It's in his name.
On Saturday morning, nature began to show more of her tricks. A brisk, early south wind died, making it difficult for boats to even get out of the harbor.
All right, here's what we're going to do. In 4 minutes, we're going up with our normal warning, shape, and gun. We'll fire it. And then probably in approximately 5 minutes, we will go into postponement.
Experienced city front skippers stayed near the starting line. They knew the west wind would come. In spring and summer, bay winds are geared to heat in the central California valleys. As the air in the valleys gets hot and rises, cool ocean air rushes in to fill the void. And it did, just 20 minutes after the postponement. This morning, when valley temperatures reached into the high 70s, the bay began to fill with air moving inland.
All clear, all clear.
At the start, wind velocity was only about 10 miles an hour, but increasing. By mid-race, it was 12 to 15 and promising more. Another moderate ebb tide helped boats upwind and slowed them downwind. The conditions were ideal for the International 1 designs.
The class was founded in Long Island Sound in 36 and 37. Officially as an IOD. It was brought to the West Coast in the late 40s, early 50s. They're 33 feet, about 25 and a half, 26 feet on the water. There's a large overhang. Most of the boats out here have been beefed up a little bit. They put a longer mast step in them and jock straps to hold the sides in. And they take the weather. They're terrific boats. They go like hell. And they became very popular because of their beauty and their speed and the way they handle. It's a classic design, classic boat.
Few boats in the 30 to 36-foot range, including the new 3/4-ton racing machines, can outperform the IC on the bay. If conditions were ideal for the ICs, they were less than the best for the bird boats. All things considered, however, the Bird is one of the great racing yachts of all times. Few boats have ever so capably handled the specific conditions for which they were designed. The bird is an incredible performer in the punishing wind and chop of San Francisco Bay.
The bird boat was designed specifically for the weather conditions we find on the bay here, and it's pretty rough on the bay in the summertime. It's found nowhere else. It's found nowhere else, and it was designed in 1921. A group of yachtsmen wanted a good heavy weather boat, knowing that the conditions are such as they are here in the summertime, and it hoots and hollers here, seas and heavy winds, and they were designed solely for the bay conditions. This place is long around, say, 9,000 pounds, and it is 30 feet.
With the wind picking up at the end of the race, the birds began to show their power. The winner of the regatta was Grey Goose, vintage 1929. At the finish, the boats that sailed away from the shore did best. They caught the last of the helping ebb tide, while those who tacked too close to shore ran into the first of the incoming flood. It was a classic example of the wisdom of Christopher Morley when he wrote, "Man must learn, or his name is mud, to relish the ebb as well as the flood." That was Saturday morning. The wind Saturday afternoon was typical of spring in the bay, straight out of the west at 18 to 20 miles an hour. It presented no problem. But the tide was something else. A fierce 3.5 mile per hour flood 200 yards offshore sent boats fleeing for a less violent current along the beach. The Knarr start saw 24 boats scrambling for position on the rocks. The Folkboats also had fun fighting for good tide and clean air. Strategy for a flood tide race on the city front calls for short tacking along the beach all the way to a ley line for the first mark. Attack out to a visible tide line, then attack in, all the way. A flood tide race offers only one consolation: minimal chop. With wind and tide rushing in the same direction, the seas remain short and even. An ebb tide race with 20-mile breezes causes horrendously steep and uneven waves. Whatever the seas, the Knarrs handle them well.
The Knarr was designed in Norway. First one was built during the war there in 1942. But the first Knarr came in here to San Francisco in 1958. We had 28 boats, and we are up to 25 boats in the starting line. That Knarr is a heavy weather boat. It is under canvased. It's 250 square feet. And therefore, that's probably why it is a success on San Francisco Bay. It has 2,250 pounds keel, which is a heavy ratio to the overall weight. It's a very competitive class. We try to drive our boat to the most.
Like the Knarr, the Folkboat is a Scandinavian boat which has proved itself ideal in the bay's rugged conditions. Some 3,000 Folkboats have been built, making the class one of the largest one-design groups in the world. As a matter of fact, second only to the Dragons in active competition on the international scene.
A Folkboat is an all-around type boat. It's a comfortable boat to sail. It'll do anything you ask it to do as long as you know how to do it. Set it up right. It's 25 feet long. The sail area versus the size of the boat and the displacement of the boat is as close to perfect as it possibly can be. And that is one of the reasons that the boat sails the way it does.
On the way back to the finish line, the smart crews play the shoreline again, looking for an early ebb tide and avoiding the heavy flood 300 yards offshore. Tacks can now be longer as the tide line moves out. On the San Francisco city front, the third race was considered routine.
We had a rather disappointing day.
As we rounded the buoy and let things go, it just busted.
We lost a place at the first weather mark when we had to fish one of our crew members out of the water. Then we broke our jib boom. So we fouled the boat and had to withdraw. We didn't even make the start. Tomorrow is another day.
3, 2, 1, fire!
The start of Sunday's race saw some difference of opinion. Some boats went offshore looking for the last of the morning's helpful ebb tide. Others stayed inshore to avoid a rapidly building flood tide. The wind was typically out of the west, blowing at 18 to 20 miles per hour. By the time the boats reached the mark, there was wind aplenty, 25 with gusts to 30. And the tide was now flooding at more than 4 miles an hour. The boats had to go inshore as they turned back into the wind. It was tough going, but the little Bear boats thrived on it, having been designed for just what they were facing.
There are 65 boats now actively sailing. They were designed to handle the heavy weather of the bay and rigged accordingly and built accordingly. Very, very heavy construction for a 23-foot boat. In other words, a Bear displaces something like 4,400 pounds for 23 feet and has quite a large rig for its size, a large sail area for its size, and we don't have reef points. We just go gung-ho all the time.
Although not that unusual, the big wind did cause some problems, some of them familiar to racing sailors. the incoming tide at maximum velocity during the final leg of the race, the only way to fly was inshore all the way. The air echoed with the city front's familiar lyrics. That's the way it goes on a city front flood tide race. So why do people do it when the bay has 300 square miles of open water?
I really don't know. I guess it sounds crazy, but it's really wild. As far as I'm concerned, you can have the Olympic Circle. I'll take the city front anytime.
So went 3 rather typical days of boat racing on San Francisco's city front. The winners? Does it matter? Anyone who gets through 3 days without equipment breakdown or damage is a winner. That achievement alone is rewarding. This year, nature was relatively cooperative. Last year, with roaring ebb tides and winds up to 35 miles an hour, saw 3 boats dismasted, a rudderless boat smashed on the rocks, 2 others with serious hull damage, 3 crewmen overboard, and more than a few booms broken, sails ripped, and halyards snapped. For those who have experienced it, there is what might be called a mystique about racing sailboats on the city front. And for everyone, there is an abiding magic in the beauty and sturdiness of wooden boats. Perhaps a paraphrase of Kenneth Graham's famous line says it all. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply racing around in wooden boats on San Francisco's city front.